Chris is just there, standing beside Marlo Stanfield, watching, listening, doing the quiet work that lets a young king become a real king. In a show full of people who talk themselves into power, Chris is frightening because he barely talks at all. He does not need to explain what he is. His whole body has the patience of someone who has done terrible things long before the camera found him. That is the first thing that makes him feel different from almost every other street figure in The Wire. Avon Barksdale moves like a man who was raised inside a code. Stringer Bell moves like a man trying to turn that code into a business plan. Omar Little moves like a myth that the street keeps retelling because it needs something to believe in. Marlo wants the crown stripped of every old rule, every old courtesy, every old excuse. Chris is the instrument that makes that possible. He is the man who takes Marlo's blank hunger and gives it a working body. The Wire is always careful about power. It does not treat power as just charisma, muscle, money, or fear. Power needs systems. It needs people who can carry orders without turning them into drama. Chris becomes one of the clearest examples of that. Marlo's crew does not take over West Baltimore because Marlo is loud, or because Snoop is wild, or because the soldiers are especially loyal. They take over because Chris knows how to make violence clean, repeatable, and hidden. In a city where murder is usually public, messy, emotional, and easy to trace back to a beef, Chris turns murder into a procedure. That is why the vacant houses matter so much. The bodies are not left in the street where the police can count them and the city can pretend to care. They are sealed away behind plywood and nails, turned into silence. The victim disappears, the family waits. The police have no number to put on the board, and the city keeps functioning because the evidence has been buried inside its own abandoned architecture. Chris understands something brutal about Baltimore. If a person can vanish into a place the city already abandoned, the system may never notice. The vacant houses are not just hiding places. They are the city's neglect turned into a weapon. That makes Chris more than Marlo's muscle. He is one of the show's purest images of organized street violence adapting to the failures around it. The old Barksdale world was violent, but it still had a certain visibility. Corners were claimed, bodies dropped, names traveled. When Avon wanted to send a message, the point was for people to receive it. Chris works inside a newer logic. The message is still there, but it reaches the street before it reaches the police. People know someone is gone. People know there is no proof. Fear spreads better when the body is missing, because the imagination has to finish the murder on its own. As a street figure, Chris is terrifying because he has no need to perform toughness. Weebay had swagger, loyalty, humor, appetite. He could kill someone and still feel like a man who belonged to a social world. Chris feels lonelier than that, even when he is surrounded by people. He has a calmness that almost seems professional, and that calmness makes him harder to read. He can stand beside Snoop and watch her talk with that loose, almost playful energy, while he stays still enough to make the whole scene feel colder. Snoop is frightening because she seems born into the absurdity of the street. Chris is frightening because he seems trained by it, shaped by it, and emptied out by it until only function remains. The show never gives him a long confession. It does not sit him down and explain his childhood, his damage, his private code, or the exact road that made him into this man. That restraint matters. Chris carries hints of a past, and the most important one comes through Michael. From the moment Chris notices Michael, there is a different kind of attention in him. He sees the boy's anger before anyone says what it is. He understands the silence around Michael's stepfather before Michael can really explain it. He recognizes the kind of fear that has lived too long in a house and started to look normal from the outside. The murder of Bug's father is the moment where Chris becomes more complicated than a perfect killing machine. Up to that point, his violence can be understood as business, territory, discipline, and Marlo's will. With Bug's father, something else comes through. Chris does not just kill him. He beats him in a way that feels personal, uncontrolled by his usual standards, almost intimate in its rage. Snoop notices it because she knows his rhythm, and this is outside that rhythm. Chris usually kills like someone completing a task. Here, for once, the task opens a door in him. That scene does not redeem him. It makes him worse in a more human way. He is capable of recognizing a child's pain, capable of protecting Michael from a man he sees as a predator, capable of acting from something that resembles moral disgust. Then he goes back to feeding that same child into the machinery of Marlo's crew. He saves Michael from one form of abuse and hands him a gun, a corner, a life where survival means becoming dangerous before anyone can touch you again. Chris can see the wound, but the only cure he knows is violence. In his world, protection and corruption can come from the same hand. That is one of the strongest things The Wire does with him. It refuses to make humanity the opposite of brutality. Chris has tenderness in him. He can be patient with Michael. He can show respect to Snoop. He can be loyal to Marlo with a kind of quiet devotion. He can read people carefully, almost gently when he needs to. Those qualities do not pull him away from murder. They make him better at it. His intelligence, patience, and emotional control become tools in the service of a dead world. He is also one of the few characters who fully understands Marlo without needing Marlo to explain himself. Marlo is not Avon. He is not interested in the old idea that a king should be loved by the neighborhood or respected under a recognizable code. Marlo wants his name to live in people's mouths as a threat. He wants fear without intimacy. He wants reputation without obligation. Chris understands the purity of that desire. He does not soften it, question it, or try to translate it into older street language. He simply builds the conditions where Marlowe's name can become law. This makes Chris important to what The Wire is saying about the street changing over time. The show begins with the Barksdale organization, which already feels cold and dangerous, but still has roots. Avon remembers the neighborhood. He has family in the game. He has old friendships, old grudges, old rules, and old sentiment. Stringer wants to modernize the game, but he is still haunted by the fact that human beings keep getting in the way of his clean plans. Marlowe's world comes after that. It is younger, thinner, and more absolute. Chris is the soldier of that world. He has the discipline Stringer wanted, the violence Avon understood, and the emotional distance Marlowe requires. His relationship with Snoop also tells you a lot about him. They are one of the strangest duos in the show because they often seem relaxed in the middle of horror. They buy nail guns, joke about tools, teach Michael how to handle himself, sit in cars, wait on targets, and move through murder with the plain rhythm of people doing a job they know well. The show does not make them cartoon assassins. Their casualness is the point. Killing is part of their daily schedule. The more ordinary they make it feel, the more disturbing it becomes. Chris is the steady center of that duo. Snoop has more verbal color, more visible menace, more street theater in her presence. Chris has the judgment. He decides when to move, when to wait, when a person is lying, when a kid is ready, when a risk is worth taking. Snoop may seem more memorable at first because she has that unforgettable voice and that strange comic darkness around her. But Chris is the one who gives the violence weight. He is not just a killer. He is a manager of death. That phrase sounds extreme until you look at how he operates. He tests people. He watches patterns. He understands when fear has worked and when it has failed. He teaches younger soldiers to move carefully. He cleans up loose ends. He uses abandoned houses because the city has already supplied the perfect graveyard. In another context, those same traits could belong to a good detective, a good foreman, a good officer, a good organizer. The tragedy of Chris Partlow is that his competence has found its natural home in a criminal economy because the rest of the world has no real place for men like him by the time we meet him. The Wire often shows how talent gets captured by the wrong institution. D'Angelo has emotional intelligence, but it is trapped inside the family business until it destroys him. Bodie has discipline and pride, but the corner turns those qualities into a slow death sentence. Stringer has ambition and strategic thinking, but he cannot escape the violence that made his money real. Chris has the skill set of a highly capable operator. He can plan, wait, read, train, and execute. In West Baltimore, all of that becomes murder with good logistics. This is where his meaning reaches beyond Marlowe's crew. Chris is what happens when the street produces a professional. Not a flashy hustler, not a loud gangster, not a reckless shooter trying to prove himself on the corner. A professional. Someone who understands that survival comes from discipline more than noise. He is the kind of figure every organization wants and every neighborhood fears, the man who does not need to be high, angry, desperate, or excited to do violence. He can do it sober, patiently, and well. That also makes him a nightmare for the police. The Wire is full of cops trying to read the street through patterns. Bodies, calls, informants, corners, money names. Chris attacks the very things police need in order to make a case. No body means no murder count. No public scene means less pressure. No loose talk means fewer witnesses. No emotional explosion means fewer mistakes. He turns the weakness of the city into cover, and for a long time he beats the institution by understanding it better than it understands him. There is something especially cruel about the fact that Chris's murders are hidden inside vacants. The show spends seasons showing Baltimore as a place full of empty institutions, empty promises, empty schools, empty political language, empty reform efforts. Chris uses empty houses. He turns vacancy into a literal tomb. The city leaves holes in itself, and Marlowe's crew fills them with bodies. It is one of the bleakest visual ideas in the whole series because it makes murder feel like an extension of urban policy. Nobody planned it that way in some official room, but the outcome is the same. Abandon a place long enough and someone will find a use for the abandonment. Chris also changes the emotional temperature of the show. In the earlier seasons, violence often comes with grief, panic, anger, or consequence. Wallace's death is devastating because the boys killing him are still boys, and the room feels too small for what the game is asking them to do. D'Angelo's death is cold, but it carries the horror of betrayal. Stringer's death has history in it. Even Bodie's death feels like a last stand by someone who knows the ground has disappeared beneath him. Chris brings a different temperature. His violence is quiet enough to feel administrative. People are processed. That is why Marlowe's reign feels so spiritually dead. Avon's world was murderous, but you could still feel a social order around it. There were barbecues, boxing gyms, family ties, old-school arguments, and a sense that the game had rituals even when those rituals were hypocritical. Marlowe's world strips that down. Chris is central to that stripping down because he removes the emotional mess from the act of domination. A person becomes a problem, the problem is taken to a vacant, and the vacant is sealed. The street receives the message without the city receiving the evidence. The strange thing is that Chris never seems stupid about any of this. He is not deluded in the way some characters are. He does not appear to believe in glamour. He does not seem intoxicated by money. He does not chase attention. He is not trying to be Marlowe in miniature. His loyalty has a different quality, almost like service. He believes in the structure they are building because for him, structure may be the closest thing to safety. Marlowe gives him direction, and Chris turns that direction into order. A terrible order, but order all the same. That loyalty is one reason he stands out. In a show where most alliances are unstable, Chris seems almost completely reliable. He does not plot behind Marlowe's back. He does not get sloppy for ego. He does not talk too much. He does not need constant reassurance. In street terms, that makes him incredibly valuable. The king can sleep because Chris is awake. The corners can shift because Chris handles the bodies. The rumors can spread because Chris makes sure there is enough truth behind them to make fear stick. And yet, his loyalty also makes him smaller than he could have been. Chris is intelligent enough to lead, but he never seems to want the crown. That matters because it separates him from people like Stringer, Avon, Marlowe, Prop Joe, and even Bodie in his own smaller way. Chris does not define himself through ownership of territory or the dream of a name. He defines himself through role. He is comfortable being the hand, the shadow, the man beside the man. That makes him scarier because ambition often creates weakness. Ambitious men make speeches. Chris waits. His calm also gives Marlowe's youth a kind of false maturity. Marlowe is younger than the older players, but with Chris beside him, he feels backed by something ancient and severe. Chris makes Marlowe's rule look less like a young man's gamble and more like an inevitable shift in the city. Without Chris, Marlowe might still be dangerous, but he would feel exposed. Chris gives him infrastructure. He takes the king's desire and makes it operational. The Wire uses that dynamic to show how leadership is often a story told after the fact. People remember Marlowe as the king because his name sits at the top. But on the ground, the reign depends on Chris. A king's name matters only if someone can enforce it consistently. Chris is the reason Marlowe's quiet voice carries. He is the reason Marlowe can stand still while everyone else adjusts around him. The crown looks clean because Chris handles the blood. Michael's arc shows the cost of that system better than anything. Chris sees Michael's potential because Michael has the same guarded silence, the same refusal to be easily read, the same sense that childhood ended too early. He understands him almost too well. For a while, there is something like mentorship between them, and it is disturbing because Chris may be the first adult man in the show who reads Michael correctly. He does not dismiss him, mock him, or force a confession out of him. He gives him space. He sees the danger in him and respects it. That respect is poisonous. Michael needed protection, but the street gives protection with a bill attached. Chris helps remove Bug's father, and that act ties Michael to him. It creates gratitude, fear, debt, and a path forward that narrows with every step. Chris does not have to manipulate Michael in a loud way. He simply gives him the only kind of strength their world recognizes. By the time Michael fully understands what he has entered, he has already been trained to survive inside it. Chris's mistake with Michael is also one of the few times his reading of people fails. He sees the wound and the potential, but he underestimates the part of Michael that refuses ownership. Michael can be shaped, trained, and used for a while, but he cannot be fully possessed. That is why the end of Michael's time with the crew feels so inevitable. Marlowe's world cannot tolerate anyone whose loyalty has limits. Chris may care about Michael in his own controlled way, but caring does not save Michael once suspicion enters the room. The machine Chris helped build has no space for the humanity Chris occasionally shows. There is real tragedy in that, though Chris himself is too contained for the show to let it spill out in a dramatic way. He builds a world where trust is impossible, and then he loses the one younger figure he seemed to genuinely understand. He protects Michael from abuse and helps turn him into someone who can only live outside the reach of normal life. Michael becomes the next Omar-like figure, alone with a shotgun and a code shaped by injury. Chris does not create all of that by himself, but he helps push the boy toward it. His protection is one more stage of the damage. When Chris finally falls, it feels less like justice arriving and more like accounting catching up. He is not defeated in a heroic street confrontation. The case catches the bodies. The hidden system becomes visible. Even then, he does not collapse into panic. He takes the weight. He accepts the consequence with the same stillness he brought to the work. That ending fits him because Chris was never built for confession. He was built for endurance. Prison does not reveal some hidden cowardice in him. It confirms the thing we already knew. He can absorb punishment if the role demands it. His fate also says something about how The Wire treats accountability. Chris goes to prison, but the conditions that made him valuable remain. Marlowe gets a version of escape, the city gets a case, the dead get names, the police get clearance. None of that restores what was lost. The vacant houses are open, but the city that created them is still there. Chris can be removed, yet the logic that produced him remains available for the next crew with enough patience to use it. That is why Chris Partlow matters so much to The Wire. He is not just one great villain standing beside another. He is the show's final form of street violence before the series closes. Through him, the drug game becomes quieter, colder, and more efficient. The old arguments about honor and reputation start to feel like decorations over something much more basic. Control the fear, hide the bodies, train the young, remove the weak points. Let the city's emptiness do half the work. As a character, he works because the show never asks us to enjoy him in a simple way. He is compelling because he is calm, intelligent, and loyal. He is horrifying for the same reasons. The part of him that can see Michael's pain is real, and the part of him that can seal a person inside a vacant is real. The Wire does not separate those pieces to make him easier to judge. It leaves them in the same body. That is the discomfort of Chris Partlow. He is not a monster because he lacks human qualities. He is frightening because his human qualities have been organized around violence. As a street figure, he means professionalism without mercy. He is the man who understands that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest, that reputation grows faster when people have to whisper, and that a body hidden in the right place can do more damage than a body left in the open. He is respected because he is useful, feared because he is exact, and remembered because he made Marlowe's reign feel possible. Many characters in The Wire want power. Chris shows the labor behind power. By the end, Chris Partlow feels like one of the purest products of the show's world. He is what the corner does with discipline. He is what abandonment does with intelligence. He is what loyalty becomes when it serves a man like Marlowe. He is the quiet worker behind a reign of terror, the mentor who damages the boy he understands, the killer whose calm makes the city feel even more broken. The Wire needed Chris because the final version of the street could not be carried by speeches anymore. It needed someone who could stand still, say very little, and make disappearance feel like policy.